As a child in southern Africa, Sandy Cunningham experienced firsthand the upheavals of historic political changes, but she never stopped loving Africa with the same wonder she had as a girl. In this episode of the Uncharted Global Safari podcast, we learn all about Sandy's safari of a lifetime. Let's jump in. You were born in what was then called Rhodesia and then became Zimbabwe through the tumult of those bush wars. And we've been talking about this recently because of the movie version of Alexandra Fuller's book, Don't Let's Go to the Dogs Tonight, which, you know, you had a lot of, I watched it last week on able to stream it. And I recommend that strongly to anybody with an earshot of this podcast. Great movie and super evocative of, a time and a place seen through a child's eyes. So what are your, I know that was evocative for you. What are your feelings about revisiting that era and all that, that history?
Yeah, no, great question. Back in 2001, when I was a new mom, the book had come out and I'd have friends call me up and go, "We're reviewing this in our book club and we would love you to talk about it." Or people would say to me, "Oh my God, I had no idea this was what your childhood was like growing up in Rhodesia." And it is just about one of the best portrayals of childhood during the Rhodesian Bush War, which, for us in Africa was kind of the equivalent of guerrilla warfare along the lines of Vietnam, except it was Alexandra lived on a farm. Our family lived in the city, but it was no less scary in the city. Terrorists were always there. We had a terrorist, climb over our garden wall, and our dog kind of took him out. Police trained Alsatian dog, obviously. But yeah, the movie was amazing because quite often movies are really such a letdown. The director and producer was South African as well, I believe. But the young child actress who played a young Alexandra Fuller absolutely nailed it. I mean,
unbelievable performance.
She doesn't get an Oscar for that. No, nobody deserves an Oscar, frankly, because it was one of the best portrayals by an actress, I think, of all time. It was just phenomenal. It's hard to get the South African accent at the best of times. Few have done it and done it well. It's an odd accent, but it was such an amazing portrayal. And I think I took my husband and our girls, and we went with a good friend of ours, Dave, as well. And we caught the last day that it was showing at the local theater here in Santa Barbara. And I think my girls were a little nervous because they had not read the book, which they're going to read. Daisy's already started. But I think they were concerned that it was going to show a lot of scary stuff, like some of the stories I'd told them about my childhood and what I had experienced, and, how it was a terrifying childhood, but it was normal. People say to me, "Oh, don't you need therapy?" I'm like, oh, whatever. It was my childhood. I don't feel like I have trauma from it. I'm maybe a little scared in my house when my husband's not around, but I'm well armed with my machete knife and my Somali sword stick and my rungu, and I've got dogs. But it was a beautiful childhood. I mean, things like driving in convoys to go on holiday to Victoria Falls over Christmas time was totally normal. There would be an armed tank in the front, and then a couple of cars, and then another armed tank kind of called a rhino, and then another few cars, and then another tank. And this went on, for a convoy of at least 20, 25 vehicles. There were times and places that we couldn't go, and times that things started to really kind of crowd us and affect us. I mean, going to school was totally normal. We didn't have fire drills. We had tour drills, like what happens when a hand grenade or a bomb is lobbed into the school gardens. I mean, so we had all this preparation, very much like a fire drill here, but we didn't have fire drills. We had tour drills.
Right.
It was a very complicated war, because what was portrayed in the media and what the British government portrayed was very different to what was actually happening. It was all part of the Cold War. And you've got this rush from, Cuban, Russian-backed forces, Chinese-backed forces, all in a push to control the African continent and part of the Cold War. So it's a story that's not really out there much in terms of the real history behind the Rhodesian Bush War. It's made out to be a black and white issue, which South Africa very much was. Rhodesia was different. It was definitely a black and white issue, but there were other forces playing into it at that time, in the 70s, early 80s.
So then your family, you did eventually emigrate to South Africa.
Yeah,
mean,
so I was actually
as a
born in South Africa. My younger sister
yeah.
and I were born in South Africa. My dad is from what was Northern Rhodesia, it's now Zambia. My mom was from South Africa. And they kind of met in Bulawayo at a debutante ball. Dad was an officer just returning from Sandhurst, and my mom was a debutante, and they met. And they had one daughter in Rhodesia, and then they moved to South Africa for a job for dad. And they had two daughters there, and then they wanted to move back to Rhodesia. So yeah, so that's kind of, I was 3 when I moved back to Rhodesia and kind of grew up there throughout the war and everything.
How old were you when you moved back to South Africa?
I was 13 when I moved back to South Africa.
Okay.
It's sort of like going between Arizona and California. I mean, it was so close. But yeah, dad, again, you know, as the war was starting to wind down, he needed to get a job. So a job was an opportunity that he just could not pass up, came up in Johannesburg. And he was head of personnel management for one of the largest gold mines in South Africa. And yeah, and funny enough, Cyril Ramaphosa was actually the head of the mine workers union at the time. So my dad dealt with him a lot over the years when he was based there.
And it's amazing that you lived through that, because you went sort of, you went from the Bush War Rhodesia to the apartheid South Africa, and then lived through all that transition too. But, that's a huge context. But, given that you've gone into the safari business, and what was your level of engagement with Safari World or wildlife? Or, I know that you went to hospitality school in Switzerland or whatever, but so that's another way in. But from childhood, what was your exposure to wildlife in the safari world?
Yeah. So we didn't do it the way we do it today with Uncharted, that's for sure. It was like car camping. I mean, we would rent what we called rondavels, or sort of little cottages. We'd bring all our food. And it was usually 2 or 3 families that would do it together. We would go water skiing on Kariba Dam, which seemed, again, a really brilliant choice from my parents, with all the hippos and crocs in that lake. Oh my God. And my father actually skied over. I mean, we're all like just watching this. He actually skied over a hippo's back, and that hippo just came out of the water, and he just was like booking it back to shore. We had hippos coming up into our makeshift kitchens outside our verandas at night and knocking things over. And I remember waking up one night to enormous noise outside, and this hippo had knocked over the pepper. And so it was sneezing. It was just covered in pepper. And there was so much, it was like one of those giant things of pepper. And it was just like sneezing. And my godfather, Rob's brother, Derek, was sleeping outside on the patio because he was the single guy, and all the rest of us were inside, and he was a tough guy, so he was sleeping outside on a safari cot, and this is all happening within feet of him. And this was all completely normal for my family. Like, oh yeah, no, it's not a problem. We drove on roads which were known to have landmines on them, because we had to get to the fishing cabin. We had to get to Nyanga Mountains. So it's just all this stuff that happened as a child was completely normal to me. I remember at my mom and dad's house in Rhodesia, 34A Steps Road, hiding behind the curtains in their living room because I wanted to see the news. Television wasn't a thing growing up, and even less during the Bush War. But we were not allowed to watch the news because it was so absolutely gory. And I remember hiding behind the curtains and peeking through to see the news, and instantly regretting it for what I had seen. And those memories, those images still are definitely there. And there was tremendous atrocity perpetrated by the African terrorists against the Africans that were seen as being white supporters and conspirators, which was just absolutely heartbreaking. But we were so, I don't know, it seemed so normal. I mean, we did have this incident at our house in Rhodesia when a Turk came over our garden wall and Jasper attacked him. And my dad had come back from, operational duty. He'd go for like 6-8 weeks at a time, and he'd come back and they'd have a big party at their friends' houses. At no point, did I ever not feel safe? But it was just real life. And I look back on my childhood, and I think it definitely shaped who I am today, and don't regret. I mean, obviously so many regrets as a country and people suffering, but yeah, it was an incredible childhood. Crazy as that sounds.
Yeah, I know. And then did you have any ambition or vision to living and staying in Africa or getting into the safari business? Or what was your vision of the future then?
Yeah, no, I mean, I had no vision at 13. I think I wanted to become a vet, but I couldn't even cut open a frog, so that wasn't going to be an option. So yeah, that my involvement in the safari industry actually came much later. And so that's kind of, and he'd already been out to visit his uncle in Kenya, and so had fallen in love with Kenya already. So when I graduated college, I moved to Santa Fe, and we got married. But we'd had a long distance relationship for so long, with him going to flight school and me being in university and Oxford and everything. And so it was time. It was like, let's get married. And he's like, do you want a 2-week honeymoon and an expensive rock, or do you want to go traveling for a year? I was like, traveling for a year. So we went to Switzerland. We both worked there teaching skiing, and then headed down to Kenya. And my best friend from England lived there. His uncle lived there. So we had already an established community. I applied for a job with a fabulous horse safari company called Tony Church started it, and his son Gordy runs it now. And it's just fantastic. Anyway, Tony lived in a castle, and my only in there was my mom was really good friends with his ex-wife. Anyway, hotel school, hospitality training aside, he's like, you know nothing about Africa. You don't speak the language. I can't hire you. So I was kind of really upset and deflated. So I took a job running a collection of restaurants all under one roof, the Horseman complex in Karen. And honestly, that was everything has a purpose. And I met everybody in the safari industry there: guides, pilots, politicians. The president's son at the time and his best friend would hang out in the bar every night. I'd have to kick them out at 2. Richard Leakey, when he'd had his big altercation and had been beaten up in Nakuru, he held his press conferences there, and he said, Sandy, just close the doors and let in one journalist at a time. And he would just repeat the story over and over. I could tell you verbatim what he said, but I mean, there was just everybody came through that restaurant, and I met everybody. And anyway, our good friends Austrians were getting married, and they wanted us to come to their wedding and be a part of their wedding party, and dress the part in dirndl and chip and lederhosen. And Rolf, the owner of the Horseman, wouldn't let me go. So I said, fine, I quit. And he was like, no, I was just kidding. Of course you can go. Can you just go for a week? And I said, I'm going for 2 weeks. And I quit. So left, we went to Austria. And whilst we were there, those our old answering machines, there were like 20 messages from Trish Bonham, Richard Bonham's sister, who ran his safari business in their lodge in the Chulu Hills. And by, I think, message number 15, she's like, okay, this is just bloody rude. Just have the decency to at least return my phone call. Anyway, so when I got back from Austria, I was like, oh my God. She had heard from people that I'd left the Horseman and was calling me to see if I wanted to run Old Donyo Was Lodge. And I said, I would love to, but I have a husband. And she's like, well, what does he do? And I said, well, he's a wildlife guide and a bush pilot. And she's like, perfect. So we drove down a day later, the old-fashioned way of getting to Old Donyo Was. And it was still smoking after a bushfire had burned most of the lodge down. And we just looked at each other and said, we love it. We'll take it. We'll do it. And then, we were back not shortly thereafter, helping with the rebuild. Richard was on a buffalo hunting safari in the Sulu Game Reserve when he still did those. And he had a young kid who's probably about 18 at the time, just kind of overseeing the lodge and keeping an eye on things until we arrived. And he was a wonderful kid called Richard Roberts, and his parents, Willie and Sue, became dear friends. And he was so knowledgeable. He was really into butterflies. So he and I would go out catching butterflies and painting butterflies. And he showed us one ton, this huge elephant with one massive tusk. And we found him. And I mean, it was amazing. I mean, we had to figure out, what are we going to hang towels from? So I took the step ladders from Taos Pueblo, and I said, we can fold the towels on them, and those are all over Africa now. There were none before. We collected horns out in the bush and then would varnish. Well, first we dipped them to get rid of all the maggots and worms, and then we'd varnish them and just stucker them onto the walls for luro holders, and giraffe femurs became other towel racks. So we got so creative, and it was, the whole team were on site. The guy with the 3 guys on their sewing machines and sewing the mosquito nets and teaching the cooks and everybody in the kitchen how to do stuff. And it was such a basic kitchen. I go into these kitchens now. I just came back from Africa, from Rwanda and Uganda. And I'm like, don't even talk to me. This is so state of the art. I mean, they would collect charcoal, they put it on a concrete slab, and we'd have just bits of charcoal that pots would boil on top of. If we wanted to bake anything, it went into an ammo tin and was buried underground with coals on the top and the bottom. And that was, we had one fridge which really worked, one freezer which just about never worked. And it was magic. I mean, we met so many interesting people, from wonderful Swedish families to movie stars to politicians to Supreme Court justices, and bloody funny as hell, British couples who would drink gin from 10 a.m. and play cards all day. And then we were like, don't you want to go on safari? And they're like, oh no, it's right there. We're fine. And it was incredible. It really was. It was a magical time, and definitely.
You have seen some changes. I mean, you mentioned the Rwanda and Uganda, but Old Danyo is now literally a relay and chateau rated kitchen. Yeah. The cuisine there is relay and chateau.
It really is.
But let's go back to Zimbabwe, because that's where we started this conversation, and it's had such a tumultuous past, recent past. And let's look at it through the lens of the safari industry there. They had a great tradition, and I think they probably still have this reputation of having the highest standards for guiding certification, in all of Africa. And there are great wildlife resources and, places like Mana Pools and Shwangi and the Matobos Hills, and it's got a great infrastructure, and then the Zimbabwe side of Victoria Falls, and it's great. But tell me, how the arc of, because when I got into covering this stuff in the early, around 2000 or whatever, it was still a, safe place to go. And then things kind of deteriorated there with political violence and economic devastation, and became not such a safe place to go. What's your, understanding, as someone who's in the business of creating safe and great safaris for people? What's the Zimbabwe? How would you describe the Zimbabwe story in the 21st century?
Yeah, I mean, they definitely had their ups and downs, and it was just so devastating. So many Zim guides, moved to other countries to work, Zambia, Botswana, South Africa, because people just weren't going on safari. They didn't feel safe there. It was hard. And it was hard for me to sell it. I know so many companies did, because it was so cheap, basically giving it away. But I'm glad that they did, because they continue to support. It was, I think, having grown up there and everything, it was just tougher for me to support a government that was, just so blatantly corrupt. I
remember reading stories about the national parks the land being given away to civilians, rather than preserved for wildlife or as a national asset.
Free to poach, free to know. Things have definitely changed since then. Having come back recently from Rwanda, which is just if there was a royal family of Africa, Rwanda would be the queen. And
oh my gosh,
most amazing. What that government and what that country has been through and how they've come on the other side is just miraculous. And I think they've set the stage for what African governments should be going forward. And what I'm seeing and hearing a lot now is a lot of people are moving back. Africans are moving back to Zimbabwe, to South Africa, to Zambia. The quality of life there is still amazing. Zimbabwe is, I read all these African business newspapers too much. And there's incredible investment going back in, which is great. And as long as it's not going into the back pockets of politicians and actually benefiting the people, I think Zimbabwe has a really, really strong chance. I mean, there's big talk about the currency changing now as well to try and stabilize that. And when you're on safari in Zimbabwe, it is truly magical. And as you mentioned, Dave, the Zimbabwean people are one of the most well-educated countries in Africa, including South Africa. Not private education, but government education. Incredible education for all in what was Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe. And, that really translates across the board in terms of Vic Falls is its own little it's like Disney World. It's beautiful and it's a natural wonder, but it's sort of like that's Zimbabwe that people see. But when you go into the Matopos, this magical, koppies outcropping, part of the old volcanic mountain range that stretched from North Africa all the way down through Southern Africa. The Matopos held so much magic. There's rhinos there, there's cave paintings. The property that we love there, Amalinda, is owned by a family whose legacy and history goes back to Livingston, I believe, or Rhodes, I can't remember. Their ancestors were the people that actually bred what we know today as the Rhodesian Ridgeback through crossbreeding different breeds. And they're just such a legendary family, and the new generation has taken over.
And they've stuck it out. And
they've stuck it out.
First of all, it's a completely singular place. There's no other place like it, because the rooms that you stay in are literally in like caves.
Yeah.
They're really nice caves.
Yeah.
But they have, there are rock art sites that, that go back thousands of years. It's a place of incredible spiritual meaning to the eons of Africans that live there. And they got, like you said, the wildlife is fantastic. I mean, it's a gem, and that family has stuck it out. And to me, that's inspiring to see, that through it all, Amalinda is still Amalinda, and there's a new generation coming online to be the stewards of it. And what would you say if somebody expresses interest in Zimbabwe? What kind of safari do you recommend or design?
I mean, if it's a first trip to Southern Africa and they want to focus on Zimbabwe, obviously starting in Vic Falls or starting in Bulawayo and then driving down to the Matopos, at least 3 nights. They have the most amazing pool, which is it was a natural kind of flow of the rock, the way that the rock. And I remember Sharon's husband saying to me, "This is where we're going to build a pool." I'm like, sure. And they actually did it. And it's just one of the most stunning pools, bush pools in Africa. I would go from there. I would go up to Wangi and do 3 or 4 nights in Wangi, and then go up to Mana Pools, Rukomachi, do 4 nights up there. Dive in Vic Falls on the front or back end for a couple of nights just for that quintessential river experience. But yeah, I mean, it's got everything. And I mean, Wangi is, in terms of density and just huge herds of buffalo and elephant and lions and everything. I mean, it is amazing. Rukomachi.
There has been a lot of investment in the safari infrastructure there too.
Yeah.
Like top safari companies in Southern Africa are very invested in Zimbabwe. So
Great Plains.
The level is going to be basically second to none in terms of an authentic safari experience. Maybe not the peak of the chandeliers and wine cellars experience that you might have in South Africa or Botswana, but as far as I'm concerned, those are not really the frills that I go to Africa for. That's like that authentic bush camp stuff. Not that I don't like. I like appropriate luxury, not over the top luxury. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I honestly, having done just both of it in Rwanda and Uganda, there's whether it's just inappropriate luxury just for the sake of just being obnoxious, or there are people that are really and truly that love that. And it's also the design. I mean, there's so many cool designs, that they bring into different countries and different areas based on what's available to build with. Like at Oldonyo, we brought everything within, apart from the concrete, which came on a truck from Nairobi. The Makuti roofs came from Kimana Swamp, 10 miles away as the crow flew. All the rock that we built with came from the lava rock right behind us. The beams were all the wild olive wood, from the hills up above. And, I love it when it's creative luxury as much. And then I go to a place like Bisati Reserve in, volcanoes in Rwanda, and you just literally are floored by the immense, incredible design, creativity that went into this lodge, modeled after the presidential palaces of the Rwandan monarchy.
That's the trend that is like the indigenous culture and art being married to the sort of high design styles. That's to me is super interesting and exciting. The way I got into this, and our original conversation was talking about like the post-colonial era and style of safari, post-hunting, post-colonial, indigenous empowerment, all these things. It's amazing to see them really flourishing in the kind of places you're describing. It's like a new Africa in a way.
I mean, yeah, this goes back to 2001 and your article in Travel and Leisure. I think you were the first writer, and Kurt Marcus, the photographer, who ever included an Black African guy. And he kind of led the article. I mean, it was so empowering. I mean, and so before its time. I mean, you were like a trailblazer for that, which was incredible. And I love how our story all played out. And we all became friends, and we all ended up living in Santa Fe together, which was amazing. Yeah, our paths have definitely intertwined. And
well, I mean, we speak the same lingo, and somehow you were living in Atlanta, I was living in New York, and we just kind of made friends on the phone. That was before.
Yeah, so true.
Anyway,
people ask me where to go in 2026. It's like all the magic of Zimbabwe is with the people. The magic of Rwanda is with the people. Uganda, Kenya, it's always about the people. And one of the things that I felt like how the Stead family built this lodge into these koppies, and it's so authentic and it's so part of the landscape, and how they empower the local community and work with the local community. They've got amazing projects. And then you look at the stark contrast to this monstrosity of a resort being built in the Masai Mara, that was built in Mara by the Marriott Ritz-Carlton on one of the most important and vital wildlife corridors. And they're silencing people. There's talk out the president of Kenya actually owns the lodge. There's all this.
Oh no.
Nobody knows truthfully what's going on. I mean, Ritz-Carlton don't own it. They're operators, obviously. Marriott built it. We know the builders, greatest guys, live in Kenya, fantastic, did a great job, but it's too big. It's an imposition. It is absolutely an abomination. I think we're going to see a resurgence in destinations where there's fewer people. And because we're about to go to Akagera National Park in Rwanda, which is, oh my God, one of the most magical places I've been to in a long time. I went for gorillas and chimps and golden monkeys and fell in love with Akagera National Park. What a success story, conservation success story. Hardly anybody there. It was like the Mara 150 years ago. It was incredible. It felt a mix of like Laikipia and the Mara with the different terrain, and then Lake Nakuru with the lakes. It was incredible. I mean, we would have lion sightings, we'd have leopard sightings, we'd have 7 white rhino and a little black rhino wanting to join the gang. I mean, none of the guides had ever seen that, ever. They're like, oh my God. And they all raced in to come and see it. And this poor little black rhino just wanted to be a part of this white rhino family. And it was incredible. Huge herds of elephants, buffalo. I mean, it was truly magical. It was Africa of old, uncluttered. Wilderness have their own concession there, which was incredible. Nobody's allowed on the lakes. Nobody's allowed in their concession. But we went outside of the concession to the plains where we saw the lions and a ton of rhino and the big herd of elephants. And we saw one other vehicle that wasn't part of the lodge, the Wilderness 2 camps there, which was phenomenal. So I think the wildlife in the Mara cannot continue under this immense pressure. Everybody agrees on that. And it's going to have a massive come to Jesus moment. And what that means, start from scratch and create concessions like they did in Botswana. I mean, it's the only way to truly protect that ecosystem is create concessions, the concessions of the land chunks that are owned by the local Maasai people, that they can benefit, have corridors, buffer zones around those to prevent the human wildlife conflict, and then, grazing concessions. But yeah, I think there is a lot of over tourism right now to Africa. It's very in vogue to go to Africa, but it's those places I think that are not getting the ink, the love, because they're off the beaten path a little bit. That's those are the places to go. Right now, I would say.
Your superpower is your combination of experience and expertise and enthusiasm. And it's fantastic to hear how enthusiastic you are about Rwanda right now, because Africa can keep on giving and can keep on being thrilling and inspiring and exciting. And yeah. And so I'm just really glad that you went there, and we can talk about that. We can help to promote it for all the right reasons,
Yeah, but Uganda as well. I mean, if Rwanda's the queen of Africa, Uganda's like willful 15-year-old teenager, right? Organized chaos. I mean, chaotic, beautiful, amazing people, incredible parks and wildlife. And obviously everyone goes there for the chimps and gorillas, golden monkeys. They call it silver and gold. If you go to Mount Gahinga, you can trek for silver and gold. But Queen Elizabeth National Park blew me away. Walking straight out of Chimbura Gorge Lodge into Queen Elizabeth National Park to go trek down into the gorge to find the lost chimpanzees of Chimbura Gorge was phenomenal. We spent a lot of time with them, and they're lost because their traditional migratory routes outside of the gorge have all been shut down because of population encroachment. So Volcanoes is doing so much amazing work, and they're trying to create corridors so that the chimps can move out of there. Otherwise, they're going to be so inbred, if you know what I mean.
Whoa. Well, I mean, if we can, try to land this plane, you're talking about a newfound flourishing of the safari business as a vehicle for wildlife conservation, for economic development for the people, for cultural preservation. You're talking about it now in Rwanda and Uganda. We started this conversation by you talking about just in your own personal history from Rhodesia to Zimbabwe to South Africa, all the changes that have happened, in all of those countries. None of it has been easy, but as far as your window on it, the safari industry, it's not perfect, and there's a lot of problems with it, like you're talking about in the Mara, the overcrowding and the, insensitive, building that's going on there. But you're, a leader in this industry that has sort of seen it all, even in your own course, your lifetime, and you can still go back there and still be inspired anew by what you see in Rwanda and Uganda.
Yeah, I think for me, I love all the wildlife. Some people really just go for the wildlife, but it's honestly the people. The African people are just so positive and so engaging. And I mean, a lot of these people have gone through in their lifetime, Rwanda, Zimbabwe, South Africa, Uganda, and to come out with they're pure. They're absolutely pure. There's just a purity there that is just, of course, you're going to have dodgy people in every country and, in cities and whatever. But on the whole, everybody you meet, from whether it's your room steward, Mandy, singing to you in the morning to wake you up, or your chef coming out to talk about the fresh vegetables that he's picked from the garden that day. And, your guide Bosco in Akagera, who is literally leaping off the seats every time Daisy spots something, because he can't see anything down below because of the high grass. And he's like, she's going to stay with me and be my spotter. I mean, there's just such joy. There's purity and joy in Africa. And I think that's what people come back with. It's just like they go for the wildlife, but they come back because of the people. They go back time and time again for the people. And Phil always told me this. I mean, it was like he fell in love with the people. He wanted the people to benefit. They need to benefit from tourism, from conservation, from wildlife protections, from environmental, everything. And it's pure joy. Going on safari is just absolute pure joy.
All right.
As you say, David.
Let's
wrap it up there.
That's a wrap. That's, you can't put a finer point on it than that. Thank you, Sandy.